The last thing Alara Bishop remembered was the metallic taste of panic, the shudder of the London Underground car, and the blinding flash of white light as the world seemed to fold in on itself. Then, nothing. A void of sensation, followed by the brutal, ungainly sensation of falling onto something decidedly unyielding and damp. She came to with a gasp, her 21st century jeans and sweater soaked through from the English drizzle. She was not in a tunnel. She was in a mud puddle in the middle of a sprawling, manicured garden that screamed old money. A Georgian manor house of honey-colored stone, Palladian and imposing, loomed over her. The air didn't smell of exhaust and fried food, but of wet earth, boxwood, and a faint, distant whiff of wood smoke. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she groaned, pushing herself up. Her head throbbed, a bizarre montage of her life as a pragmatic, somewhat disillusioned history PhD student fighting for space with other memories. The memories of an Alara Bishop who belonged here. A distant cousin, impoverished, a burden on a forgetful aunt, recently and rather conveniently betrothed to a reclusive duke to settle a forgotten family debt. A duke she was apparently on her way to meet. No. No, no, no. This was a panic attack. A hallucination. A very detailed, very immersive dream. It was not. The confirmation arrived in the form of a stern-faced woman in a crisp grey dress and a mobcap, who appeared from a side door, took one look at Alara, and shrieked. "Miss Bishop! Good heavens! What has befallen you? His Grace is awaiting you in the drawing room." The woman, who Alara's borrowed memories identified as Mrs. Potts, the housekeeper, bustled over, pulling her up with surprising strength. "We heard the carriage arrive an hour ago. We thought you'd been set upon by highwaymen." "Carriage?" Alara echoed, her voice faint. She allowed herself to be shepherded inside, her modern clothes causing Mrs. Potts to cluck in profound disapproval. The interior was a blow to the senses. It wasn't a museum, it was a home, albeit a breathtakingly opulent one. Gilt-framed portraits of stern-looking aristocrats glared down. The air was cool, scented with beeswax and a faint, lingering sadness. "We must get you changed immediately. His Grace does not appreciate tardiness, nor informality," Mrs. Potts whispered, propelling her up a grand staircase. An hour later, Alara stood before a full-length mirror, a stranger staring back. The Alara of this time was pretty in a pale, subdued way. The gown of dove-grey silk, while elegant, was severe, high-necked, and about as flattering as a sack. Her auburn hair was twisted into a tight, unyielding chignon. She looked like a governess. A faint, doomed governess. "The debt is cleared, the contract is signed. You are to be the Duchess of Blackwood. A great honor, even if—" Mrs. Potts trailed off, her lips pinched. "Even if the circumstances are quiet." Alara's modern mind, reeling but starting to compartmentalize with survivalist grit, parsed the information. Reclusive duke. Debt. Contract. She was property. The panic began to harden into a sharp, defiant point. She had nothing here. No family, no friends, no career, no social media to update. She was adrift in 1798. But she also had nothing to lose. No reputation in this time to ruin, no expectations to fulfill beyond this cursed contract. The thought was terrifyingly liberating. She was led to the drawing room. The doors opened, and for a moment, she saw only the back of a man standing at the window, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but his posture was asymmetrical, his weight shifted onto one leg. Then he turned. Her breath caught, but not for the reason the historical Alara might have expected. The Duke of Blackwood, Alexander Fitzroy, was not the dashing, unscathed prince of a romance novel. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with the look of a classical statue that had been weathered by a storm. His hair, once probably a rich gold, was now a darker, untidy wheat color, streaked with silver at the temples. A harsh scar, pale and wicked, cut from his left temple down to his jaw, just missing his eye. That eye, a stormy grey-blue, regarded her with a chill that could frost the windows. The other was the same captivating color, but the skin around it was tight, pulled by the scar's memory. He leaned heavily on a handsome, dark wood cane. His right leg, she noticed, was held stiffly. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply looked at her as one might appraise a piece of furniture delivered to the wrong address. Miss Bishop. His voice was a low baritone, roughened by disuse or perhaps by pain. It was not welcoming. Your Grace, she murmured, dipping into the curtsy her borrowed muscles remembered. The journey was adequate. It was a perfunctory question, devoid of curiosity. Eventful, Elara said, the word slipping out with more dryness than intended. His gaze sharpened, just for a second, scanning her face. He seemed to find nothing of interest. Mrs. Potts will see you to your rooms. The wedding is in 3 days. It will be a small affair in the chapel here. I trust that is acceptable. It was not a question. It was a decree. Of course, she said. What else could she say? I'd rather have a jumbotron and a DJ, but this timeline's tech is a bit lacking. Dinner is at 8. I do not entertain. You will have the run of the house and grounds. Do not expect companionship. He turned back to the window, dismissing her. That is all. The dismissal was so absolute, so icy, it burned. This was a man buried alive in his own grief and pain. The historical records shed studded as Elara the PhD student whispered to her, the Blackwood tragedy. The fever of 92. Entire family wiped out. Parents, younger sister, fiancé. Then off to the war against France, only to return broken in body, the dashing heir now a reclusive cripple. Society's pity had been a poison head fled by shutting the world out. And now had been forced to take a wife to secure the line, a wife he clearly viewed as a necessary inconvenience. As Mrs. Potts led her away, Elara's modern heart, accustomed to swiping left on far less damaged prospects, did not flutter with fear or disappointment. It set with a steely resolve. Alexander Fitzroy was a fortress of misery, and Elara Bishop, unmoored from time, had just decided to lay siege. The wedding was indeed small. A cold, perfunctory ceremony in the draughty estate chapel with a vicar, Mrs. Potts, and the stern-faced butler, Hemsworth, as witnesses. Alexander stood stiffly, his jaw clenched, repeating the vows as if they were a sentence. Elara, in a slightly nicer but still unremarkable cream gown, felt a surreal bubble of laughter threatening to escape. She, a woman from the future, was marrying a Regency duke. The absurdity was her anchor. He did not kiss her. He placed a cold, perfunctory ring on her finger and nodded. The wedding breakfast was a silent, excruciating meal in the formal dining room under the gaze of those disapproving portraits. Alexander drank more claret than he ate. Your things have been moved to the Duchess chambers, he stated as the final course was cleared. They connect to my own. The door will remain locked. I require solitude. You will want for nothing material. Good night, Elara. He said her name for the first time. It sounded like a foreign word on his tongue. He rose, his movement a careful, painful negotiation between cane, wounded leg, and pride. She watched him go, the tap of his cane on the marble floor echoing in the vast, silent house. Well, that was not going to stand. Her chambers were lavish, a gilded cage. A 4-poster bed big enough for a soccer team, heavy damask drapes, a cold fireplace. And a door. A large, ominous, locked door that adjoined her room to his. The first week was a study in isolation. She saw him only at dinner, where silence reigned. She explored the library, devouring books on recent history, trying to align her knowledge with this new reality. She walked the grounds, noting the overgrown sections, the conservatory with broken panes, the general air of beautiful neglect. The house was a mirror of its master, grand, wounded, and closed off. Her 21st century sensibilities chafed. The boredom was a physical ache. But more than that, she saw his pain. It wasn't just in the limp, or the scar. It was in the way he stared into the fire, seeing nothing. In the way he flinched if a servant approached from his left, his blind side. He was a lion who believed his teeth had been pulled. One evening, after another silent dinner, she did not rise when he did. Alexander, she said, using his Christian name deliberately. He froze, half out of his chair. Your Grace is the appropriate form of address. We're married. I think we can manage, Alexander. She kept her voice soft, unthreatening. I am going to redecorate the morning room. It's depressingly dark. I'd like your opinion on the colors. He stared at her as if she'd sprouted a second head. Do as you wish. My opinion is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant to me. A flicker of something, confusion, irritation, crossed his face. Then you are a fool, he said bluntly, and left, his cane tapping a furious rhythm. The next day, she didn't just choose fabrics. She invaded his sanctuary. Not the locked bedroom, but his study. She entered without knocking. He was at his desk, scowling at estate ledgers. He looked up, thunderstruck. What is the meaning of this? I'm bored, she announced, plopping into the large leather chair opposite his desk. And you're brooding. It's a terrible combination for the household atmosphere. I've decided we're going to play a game. A game. He deadpanned. Chess. I saw a set in the library. You look like a man who could use a strategic challenge that doesn't involve glaring at columns of numbers. I do not play games. You do now. She stood, walking to the bookshelf where the marble chess set Saturday. She brought it over, setting it up on a small table between them with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Unless you're afraid I'll win. His grey-blue eyes locked onto hers. A spark of the man he must have been, competitive, proud, flared for a second. You are intolerably presumptuous. I am your wife, she said simply, moving a pawn. Your move. He played. He played viciously, aggressively, and he beat her in 12 moves. He sat back, a ghost of grim satisfaction on his face. You attack without thought for defense, he stated. A reckless strategy. I was testing your mettle, she said, resetting the board. Again. The second game lasted longer. She asked him questions between moves, innocuous ones about the estate, the names of the tenant farmers, the history of the oak tree on the south lawn. He answered in monosyllables at first, then, as his mind engaged with the game, in short, factual sentences. She learned he was fair, deeply invested in his people's welfare, and that he missed his sister, Eleanor, terribly. The third game, she focused less on winning and more on him. She watched his hands, long-fingered, elegant despite the nicks and scars, hover over the pieces. She saw the concentration in his eyes, the slight easing of the permanent tension in his shoulders. When she deliberately left her queen exposed, he took it, then paused, looking at her. You sacrificed your most powerful piece. Sometimes a sacrifice is necessary to see the bigger picture, she said softly, holding his gaze. Or to tempt your opponent into a false sense of security. A faint, almost imperceptible color touched his cheekbones. He cleared his throat and checkmated her 3 moves later. But he didn't immediately retreat. They sat in a silence that was no longer hostile, but thick with something unspoken. Why are you doing this? He asked finally, his voice low. You have your title, your security. You need not endure my company. Ilara met his gaze, her modern soul laid bare in her earnestness. Because I see a man worth knowing, Alexander. Not just a duke. Not just a scar and a limp. A man. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly. His face had shuttered closed again, but not before she saw the raw, vulnerable flash of pain in his eyes. Her words had not comforted, they had scalded him. Do not, he said, the words choked, pretend to see what is not there. Good night. He left her in the study, the chess pieces standing like silent sentinels between them. But as she touched the king piece he had just moved, she felt it. A crack in the fortress wall. Small, but there. And she, Ilara Bishop from the future, with nothing to lose, was just the woman to widen it. The seduction of the Duke of Blackwood had begun, and it had nothing to do with low-cut gowns and everything to do with seeing the man he refused to be. The morning after the chess game, the house felt different. The silence was no longer empty, but charged. Ilara moved through the somber halls with a new purpose, the ghost of Alexander's pained, shuttered expression driving her forward. His retreat had felt like a victory, a brutal, heartbreaking one, but proof that she could reach him. Her historical counterpart's wardrobe, however, was a strategic disaster. The dove greys, muddy browns, and fortress-like high necklines were designed for invisibility, not for a campaign to remind a wounded man he was alive. She needed a tactical adjustment. Summoning Mrs. Potts after a solitary breakfast, Ilara deployed her most charming, anachronistic smile. "Mrs. Potts, I find my wardrobe unsuited to the climate here. It's so much damper than London. I wonder if there's a local seamstress, or perhaps fabrics in the attics. Things from the late Duchess, or even the previous Lady Eleanor. I hate to see beautiful things go to waste." The housekeeper's stern face softened a fraction at the mention of the beloved former Lady Eleanor. "There are some trunks, Your Grace, in the East Wing, from before the fever." His Grace never could bear to have them thrown out, but to cut them up. She looked scandalized. "Not to cut up," Ilara said quickly, her historian's heart leaping at the prospect of untouched Regency relics. "To be inspired by. Perhaps some could be altered to fit me. It seems a better tribute than letting moths claim them." An hour later, Ilara stood in a sun-dusted attic room, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid of a camphor-scented trunk. Inside, folded with care, were gowns of another era. A sprigged muslin that whispered of a young girl's laughter. A ball gown of sapphire silk so rich it seemed to hold the night sky. These were not just clothes, they were ghosts. She handled them with reverence, her plan feeling suddenly selfish. But then she found it, tucked beneath the rest, a riding habit of deep forest green velvet, beautifully tailored, with a military-style cut and exquisite silver buttons. It was elegant, strong, and utterly unfussy. It would fit her, she guessed, with minor adjustments. It was not a gown designed to lure, but to do. It was perfect. She had it sent down to the local seamstress with careful instructions. In the meantime, she continued her siege. She took over the morning room, not with frills and fripperies, but by throwing open the heavy drape's head kept closed for years. She brought in armfuls of late-blooming roses and autumn foliage from the gardens, arranging them in simple, bold clusters in mismatched pitchers she found in the kitchens. The room began to smell of sunlight and earth instead of dust and disuse. She did not ask his opinion again. She simply acted. He found her there 2 days later, on her knees, attempting to rehang a lopsided portrait of a rather grumpy-looking spaniel shed discovered in a corridor. "What in God's name are you doing?" His voice from the doorway was less icy, more genuinely perplexed. "His name is Bumbles, according to the inscription," Ilara said, grunting as she tried to lift the heavy frame. "And has clearly judging us for our poor decorative choices. I thought he'd liven the place up." Before she could strain something, Alexander was beside her. With a muttered oath, he set his cane against the wall, reached up, and with a strength that belied his limp, lifted the portrait and centered it on the hook with 2 sharp taps. The movement brought him close. She could smell the clean, starch and sandalwood scent of him, feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers. The scar was livid in the morning light, but so were his eyes, a turbulent sea of grey and blue. "You are the most bewildering woman," he stated, his breath stirring the loose hairs at her temple. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's the highest compliment I've received this century." He blinked, the odd phrasing not computing. He stepped back, retrieving his cane, his movements stiff again. But he didn't leave. He looked around the room. The sun poured onto the now bright rug. The flowers blazed with color. Bumbles the spaniel oversaw it all with a smug expression. "It's different," he conceded. "It's alive," she corrected gently. She walked to the small writing desk shed commandeered, covered in her sketches of garden plans and lists of books. "I was thinking of rebuilding the conservatory, growing oranges, or pineapples. Something absurd and extravagant." A sound escaped him, a short, rusty exhale that was almost a laugh. It was gone in an instant, but it echoed in the room like a gunshot. "Pineapples," he repeated, shaking his head. He walked to the window, looking out at the grounds. "The conservatory roof is unsound. It would be a monumental waste of capital." "I have some capital," she said, joining him at the window. She didn't touch him, but stood close enough that their sleeves almost brushed. "Ideas. Energy. Time. He was silent for a long moment. Why? He asked again, the word raw. Why this? Why? Effort. She chose her next words as carefully as chess moves. Because this is my home now. And I cannot live in a mausoleum. And neither, I think, can you. He turned his head to look at her. The vulnerability she'd glimpsed was back, but closer to the surface. You know nothing of what I can live with. I know you get a line right here, she said, impulsively raising a hand and gently tracing a fingertip between his eyebrows when you're trying to solve a problem in the estate books. I know you take your tea too strong, with no sugar. I know you favor the chestnut mare in the stables but won't ride her because you think you can't. She let her hand fall, her touch lingering in the air between them. I am learning, Alexander. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling too quickly. The air crackled. For a dizzying moment, she thought he might bend his head. He might kiss her. The desire in his eyes was suddenly, shockingly palpable, a hungry, confused, and utterly male look that seared her to her core. But then his gaze dropped to her mouth, and he flinched, as if the thought of his scarred face touching her perfection was a physical revulsion. The shutters slammed down. He took a hurried step back. Do not, he said hoarsely, presume to know me. He left, but the charge he left behind was electric. Ilara pressed her cool fingers to her flushed cheeks. Progress. The green velvet riding habit arrived the next afternoon. Ilara put it on, the soft material hugging her curves in a way her other gowns never had, the cut giving her a confident, athletic silhouette. She left her hair down, a cascade of auburn waves that would cause a scandal but felt like a declaration. She marched to the stables. The head groom, a wizened man named Jed, gaped at her. Your Grace. The mare is a bit spirited for. I can handle spirited, Ilara said, with more bravado than she felt. Her 21st century self had done trail riding on holidays. How different could it be? Please saddle her. And His Grace's gelding as well. His Grace don't ride, ma'am, Jed said, looking terrified. He will today. She was leading the two horses to the mounting block when Alexander appeared at the stable door, drawn by the commotion. He froze, his eyes sweeping over her from the tips of her polished boots to the loose hair tumbling over the green velvet. A blaze of something hot and unmistakable flashed in his gaze before it was wrestled under control. What is the meaning of this? His voice was tight. It's a beautiful afternoon. We're going for a ride. She patted the steady, large gelding beside her. This is Atlas, Jed tells me. He says he's gentle as a lamb and misses you. I do not ride, Alexander said through clenched teeth, his knuckles white on the head of his cane. You used to love it, she pressed, softly. Jed told me you were the best horseman in the county. Atlas hasn't forgotten. She took a step closer, looking up at him. It's just to the old oak and back. On the soft grass. No one to see. Just you, and the horse, and the sky. She saw the war in him, the fear of failure, the longing for a taste of his old freedom, the sheer physical dread. She mounted the chestnut mare smoothly, settling into the side saddle with a grace that surprised even her. She looked down at him, offering her hand not as a plea, but as a challenge. Are you afraid, Your Grace? It was the right, or possibly the most dangerous, thing to say. His pride, that bruised, battered thing, flared. He handed his cane to a stupefied Jed, grasped the pommel, and with a grimace of pain and sheer will, hauled himself into the saddle. He settled, his bad leg held stiff, his hands automatically finding the reins. For a moment, he looked utterly shocked to be there. Then, something shifted. His shoulders, perpetually hunched against the world, straightened. He looked at the horizon, at the rolling green parkland of his estate, and a shuddering breath left him. Ilara nudged her mare forward at a walk. After a heartbeat, she heard the soft thud of Atlas' hooves following. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather, the snort of the horses, the whisper of the wind in the dying leaves. She led him off the gravel path onto a wide swath of lawn that sloped down to the giant oak. The sun was warm, dappling through the branches. When they reached the tree, she dismounted, tethering her mare. Alexander followed more slowly, his dismount awkward, his leg buckling slightly as he landed. He grabbed the saddle to steady himself, his face etched with frustration. Without a word, Ilara walked to him, took his arm, and slid it over her shoulders, taking his weight. He stiffened, but she was firm. "Lean on me," she said. "Just to the tree." They walked the few yards together, her body pressed against his side, supporting him. She felt the hard muscle of his arm, the tension thrumming through him. It was incredibly intimate. She helped him sit, leaning against the broad trunk, before sinking down beside him, a respectable but close distance away. He was breathing heavily, from pain or emotion she couldn't tell. He closed his eyes, his head resting back against the bark. "I was 16 when I climbed this tree and fell, breaking my arm," he said, the words quiet, ripped from some deep, guarded place. "My father was furious. My mother wept. Eleanor brought me lemon cakes and read to me while I was convalescing." Ilara's throat tightened. "Tell me about her." And he did. Haltingly at first, then in a growing rush. He told her of Eleanor's mischievous smile, her terrible singing voice, her love for botany and bad poetry. He spoke of his parents, stern but just, of Christmases filled with music and laughter in the now silent halls. He spoke of the fever, the swift, relentless horror of it, the empty house, the unbearable silence. Tears streamed down her face, silent and empathetic. She didn't offer platitudes. She just listened, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his memory. When his words finally trailed off, the late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows. He opened his eyes, looking at her tear-streaked face. He seemed startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "You're crying." "You loved them," she said simply, swiping at her cheeks. "It's a beautiful thing to hear. Even when it hurts." He raised a hand, hesitant, and with the back of his knuckles, brushed away a tear that clung to her jawline. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through her entire system. His fingers were rough, warm. "No one has cried for them in a very long time," he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin once, softly, before he pulled his hand away as if burned. "No one has listened." The space between them hummed. The shared confidence, the physical closeness, the golden light, it was a potent cocktail. Ilara felt a pull toward him so profound it was gravitational. She saw his eyes drop to her lips again, and this time, the hunger wasn't masked by fear. It was pure, potent want. Slowly, giving him every chance to retreat, she leaned in. She closed the distance until their breaths mingled. She saw the conflict in his eyes, desire warring with deep-seated shame. Just before her lips touched his, he whispered, a broken sound, "Ilara. I am not." "You are," she breathed against his mouth. And then she kissed him. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a claiming. A fuse lit. The moment their lips met, a dam broke within him. A low groan vibrated from his chest into hers as his arms came around her, one hand tangling in her loose hair, the other splaying across the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. The cane lay forgotten in the grass. His kiss was not the practiced art of a rake, it was desperate, hungry, a man starved for connection and sweetness. She met him with equal fervor, her hands sliding up to cup his scarred jaw, her thumbs stroking the damaged skin, silently telling him she was not afraid. He tasted of mint and the unique, dark spice that was him. The world narrowed to the feel of his mouth moving over hers, the scrape of his teeth on her lower lip, the heat of his tongue seeking entrance. She granted it, and the kiss deepened, turning molten, explorative. He shifted, wincing slightly as he moved his leg, but pulling her more firmly onto his lap, her skirts pooling around them. The evidence of his desire, hard and insistent, pressed against her thigh, even through the layers of fabric. A thrill shot through her, sharp and primal. He broke the kiss to trail his mouth along her jaw, down the sensitive column of her throat, his breath hot against her skin. "God, Ilara," he rasped, his voice thick with passion and disbelief. "What witchcraft is this?" "No witchcraft," she gasped as his lips found a particularly sensitive spot below her ear. "Just you." And me. His hand left her hair, sliding down her side, over the curve of her hip, coming to rest on her outer thigh. The velvet was no barrier, she felt the heat of his palm through it. His touch was possessive, reverent. He looked into her eyes, his own blazing with a fire shed never seen there. The insecurity was still present, a shadow at the edges, but it was being burned away by a more urgent, more powerful need. I have been a ghost, he confessed, his forehead resting against hers. You make me feel solid. You are, she whispered, kissing him again, softly this time. You are so wonderfully, powerfully solid. He kissed her back, slower now, savoring. His hand slid from her thigh to her waist, tracing the curve of her torso through the habit. The intimacy was staggering, out here under the open sky. She felt a liquid heat pooling low in her belly, a longing that was entirely new to this body, yet achingly familiar to her modern mind. She wanted him. Desperately. But he was still in Urade, they were in the middle of a field, and the sun was dipping low. Reluctantly, she pulled back, her lips swollen, her breathing ragged. Alexander, she said softly. We should return. He blinked, coming back to himself as if from a dream. The reality of their position, him on the ground, his bad leg stretched out, her in his lap, seemed to dawn on him. A flicker of the old shame returned. He helped her up, then used the tree trunk to haul himself to his feet, his face tightening in pain. She fetched his cane, handing it to him. Their fingers brushed. The connection was still there, a live wire between them. The ride back was silent, but the silence was a different creature. It was thick with shared secrets, with the memory of taste and touch. He rode more easily, as if a weight had been lifted from his soul, if not his body. At the stables, Jed took the horses, his eyes carefully averted. Alexander offered her his arm, not for support, but as a gentleman would. She took it, feeling the hard muscle beneath the superfine wool of his coat. At the foot of the grand staircase, he stopped. He looked down at her, his expression solemn, awed. Ilara. I do not know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she replied, squeezing his arm. Just don't lock the door tonight. His eyes widened. A slow, real, devastatingly handsome smile, the first she had ever seen, touched his lips, transforming his face. The scar became a mark of strength, not ruin. I believe, he said, his voice a warm rumble that vibrated through her, that would be the act of a coward. And I find I no longer wish to be a coward with you. He lifted her hand, and in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and intensely erotic, pressed a kiss not to her knuckles, but to the sensitive pulse point of her wrist. His eyes held hers over her skin, promising everything. That night, Ilara bathed in rose-scented water, her skin humming. She put on the only remotely appealing nightgown she owned, a simple but fine lawn garment. She paced her room, listening. She heard him enter his chamber, heard the shuffle of movement. Then, a definite, soft click. The sound of the lock on the connecting door being turned. Not locked. Opened. Her heart leapt into her throat. She walked to the door, her hand hovering over the handle. This was it. The point of no return. Not just a kiss in a field, but a consummation. A choice. She thought of his smile. His laugh, rusty but real. The feel of his arms around her. The broken, beautiful man who was starting to believe he might be whole enough to be loved. With a steadying breath, Ilara Bishop, time traveler, history PhD, and now Duchess of Blackwood, turned the handle and stepped into her husband's room. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Alexander's chamber was a study in masculine austerity, a stark contrast to her own gilded cage. Dark wood, deep burgundy walls, a massive fireplace where low flames danced. The air smelled of sandalwood, leather, and him. He stood by the window, having shed his coat and waistcoat. He wore only his white linen shirt, open at the throat, and his buckskin breeches, which clung to the powerful muscles of his thighs. His cane was propped against the arm of a wingback chair. He was staring out at the moonlit grounds, but he turned as she entered, his profile a sharp cut of shadow and flame. He didn't speak. The crackle of the fire and the frantic beat of her heart were the only sounds. The look in his eyes was one of raw, unguarded hunger, tempered by a vulnerability that made her chest ache. He had left the door unlocked, an invitation, but he had not come to her. This final step, it seemed, had to be hers. The door was open, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was, he replied, his own voice gravelly. She stepped fully into the room, letting the door close behind her. The click was deafening. She felt a surge of her own power, a heady, terrifying thrill. This was not a seduction of a reluctant duke anymore, it was a mutual surrender. She walked towards him, the thin lawn of her nightgown doing little to conceal her form in the firelight. She saw his gaze darken, tracking her movement with a predatory focus. When she was an arm's length away, she stopped. "I'm from the future," she said, the words spilling out unbidden, a confession she hadn't known she needed to make. He blinked, a flicker of confusion breaking through the intensity. "What?" "The day I arrived here, in the mud. I wasn't just a disheveled bride. I was transported. From the year 2023. I was a student of history. I fell, or was pulled, through time." The words sounded mad, even to her own ears, but they were the truth, and she needed him to have all of it. "I have no family here, no past. I have nothing to lose. Except you." He stared at her, his mind visibly grappling with the impossible. He didn't dismiss it as madness. Instead, he searched her face, her eyes, for the truth. He saw the absolute sincerity there, the faint shadow of the terror she'd mastered. Slowly, he raised a hand and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch reverent. "A time traveler," he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin. "It explains much. The fearlessness. The strange turns of phrase. The way you look at the world as if it is both familiar and a fascinating puzzle." A faint, wondering smile touched his lips. "It does not explain why you would choose to stay in this gilded ruin with a broken man. Because you're not broken," she insisted, covering his hand with her own, pressing it to her cheek. "You're bent. And from where I'm standing, the view is magnificent." A shudder ran through him. With a groan that was pure surrender, he closed the distance between them. His mouth captured hers in a kiss that was entirely different from the one under the oak tree. That had been a discovery. This was a claiming, deep, deliberate, and devastatingly sure. There was no hesitation now, only a rising, urgent tide of need, his arms banded around her, pulling her hard against the unyielding wall of his chest. She could feel the rapid, strong beat of his heart against her own. Her hands slid up, fingers threading into the thick, wheat gold hair at the nape of his neck, holding him to her as the kiss deepened, turned carnal. His tongue swept into her mouth, tasting her, demanding a response she gave freely, meeting him stroke for stroke. He broke the kiss only to trail his lips down her throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive cord of her neck, making her gasp. "Tell me to stop, Ilara," he breathed against her skin, his hands sliding down to her hips, pulling her even closer so she could feel the hard, urgent length of him. "For God's sake, tell me now if this is not what you want." "It is all I want," she gasped, arching into him. "I want you, Alexander. All of you." It was the permission he needed, the absolution he sought. With a growl that was pure masculine triumph, he bent and swept her into his arms. He staggered for only a second, his bad leg protesting, but his determination was absolute. He carried her the few paces to his large, canopied bed, laying her down on the dark counterpane as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. He stood beside the bed, looking down at her, his eyes blazing in the firelight. Slowly, deliberately, he began to undress. He pulled his shirt over his head, revealing a torso that stole the breath from her lungs. It was the body of a warrior, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, mapped with the scars of his service. A long, puckered scar from a saber slash marred his ribcage, another, smaller one, dotted his shoulder. They were not flaws, they were a testament, a history written on his skin. He was beautiful, in a raw, utterly real way that made her heart clench. He saw her looking, and a shadow of the old insecurity passed over his face. She sat up, reaching for him. "Come here," she whispered. He obeyed, lowering himself to sit on the edge of the bed. She knelt behind him, pressing a soft kiss to the nape of his neck, then to the top of his spine, then to each scar on his back. She felt him tremble beneath her lips. "My brave, beautiful man," she murmured against his skin. He turned, capturing her face in his hands, his expression one of awe. "How do you do this?" he whispered. "How do you see past it all?" "I don't see past it," she said, framing his scarred cheek with her palms. "I see you. The man who carries these marks and still stands. Who grieves and still breathes. Who is more of a man than any unscathed fop in a London ballroom." A sound that was half sob, half laugh escaped him. He kissed her again, pouring all his tangled emotion, gratitude, desire, adorning, terrifying hope, into it. As they kissed, his hands found the hem of her nightgown. He broke the kiss only to pull it gently over her head, tossing it aside. The cool air, and the heat of his gaze, pebbled her skin. He stilled, his breath catching as he looked at her. "Dear God," he breathed, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. "You are a vision." His touch, when it came, was exquisite. He explored her with a lover's reverence and a scholar's dedication, as if committing every curve, every sigh, to memory. His calloused palms were surprisingly gentle as they skimmed over her shoulders, down her arms, cupped the full weight of her breasts. His thumbs brushed over her nipples, and she cried out, the sensation sharp and sweet. He lowered his head, replacing his thumb with his mouth, and she nearly came apart then and there. The wet heat of his tongue, the gentle scrape of his teeth, sent bolts of pure lightning to her core. "Alexander," she moaned, her fingers clutching at his shoulders. He moved over her, bracing his weight on his arms, his body a delicious, heavy warmth above her. He kissed a trail down her stomach, his hands sliding her thighs apart. She was trembling, aching, utterly open to him. "Please," she begged, not knowing what she was asking for, only knowing she needed more of him. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, holding her gaze with an intensity that stole her breath. "Look at me, Ilara," he commanded softly. "See me." Then he lowered his head between her thighs. The first touch of his tongue was a revelation. A shockwave of pleasure so intense it was almost pain ripped through her. She cried out, her back arching off the bed. He held her hips steady, his mouth and tongue working a devastating magic, learning her rhythms, teasing her to a fever pitch. The world dissolved into sensation, the rasp of his stubble on her inner thighs, the wicked skill of his tongue, the low, approving sounds he made that vibrated through her. She was climbing, her breaths coming in ragged sobs, her hands fisted in the bedclothes. "I can't. Alexander, I'm going to." He only intensified his efforts, his fingers joining his mouth, pushing her relentlessly towards the edge. When the climax shattered her, it was with a force that stole her voice, her sight, her very sense of self. Wave after wave of pure, blinding pleasure racked her body, and through it all, he was there, his mouth gentling, soothing, until the last tremor subsided. She lay boneless, gasping, tears of sheer release leaking from the corners of her eyes. He moved up her body, kissing her stomach, her breasts, her throat, before finally claiming her mouth again. She could taste herself on his lips, a primal, intimate thing that sent a fresh surge of desire through her spent body. He was poised at her entrance, hard and thick and straining. He looked into her eyes, his own hazy with passion, but with a question still lingering. "You are sure?" His voice was ragged. In answer, she wrapped her legs around his hips, drawing him closer. "I am yours," she whispered. With a thrust that was both careful and decisive, he filled her. There was a brief, sharp pinch, quickly swallowed by the overwhelming feeling of fullness, of rightness. He stilled, buried to the hilt, his face a mask of agonized pleasure. "Ilara, you feel." Heaven. He began to move, a slow, deep rhythm that made her whimper with renewed need. Each stroke was a promise, a reclamation. He braced himself on one arm, the other hand sliding between them to find the sensitized peak of her pleasure, stroking in time with his thrusts. The dual sensation was overwhelming, building a new, tighter coil of tension deep within her. He kissed her, swallowing her moans. His movements grew more urgent, his control fraying. The bed creaked in a steady rhythm, a counterpoint to their ragged breaths and the crackle of the fire. She could feel the sweat-slicked heat of his skin against hers, the powerful bunch and release of the muscles in his back as he drove them both higher. "Look at me," he gasped again, and she forced her eyes open, meeting his stormy gaze. In that moment, she saw not the Duke, not the wounded soldier, but the man, vulnerable, powerful, and utterly, completely hers. My Ilara. My wife. Those words, spoken with such possessive tenderness, were her undoing. The coil snapped, and her second climax tore through her, even more powerful than the first, a convulsive wave of pleasure that clenched around him, pulling a guttural cry from his throat. He drove into her once, twice more, then shuddered violently, his own release crashing over him as he spilled himself deep within her, his head buried in the crook of her neck with a broken, grateful sob. For long moments, they lay entwined, limbs heavy, hearts pounding a slowing, synchronized rhythm. He was careful not to crush her, rolling to his side and pulling her with him, keeping them joined. He pressed soft, damp kisses to her forehead, her closed eyelids, her swollen lips. Eventually, he shifted, withdrawing from her body, a loss she felt keenly. But he immediately gathered her close, tucking her head under his chin, his arms wrapped tightly around her. The silence was profound, peaceful, humming with the aftermath of their union. The future, he murmured into her hair, his voice drowsy with satiation and wonder. Tell me of it. And so, wrapped in the safety of his arms, in the warmth of their bed, she did. She spoke of horseless carriages that roared, of boxes that held moving pictures and voices from across the world, of lights without flame, of medicines that could have saved his family. She spoke of a world where women could vote, could own property, could be scholars. He listened, not with disbelief, but with the rapt attention of a man hearing a fantastical, beautiful myth. It sounds wondrous. And terrifying, he said finally, his hand stroking her back. And you left it all behind. I didn't leave it. I was sent. But if I were given a choice, Alexander, to return to that world of wonders, or to stay here, in this gilded ruin with you. She tilted her head back to look at him. I would choose you. Every time. Tears glistened in his eyes. He kissed her, a sweet, lingering promise. Then I shall spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret that choice. The change in Blackwood Manor was as profound as the change in its master. Winter gave way to a lush, glorious spring, and the house, like Alexander, began to bloom. The conservatory was rebuilt, its new glass roof shining in the sun. Pineapples were indeed attempted, with more enthusiasm than success, but the lemon and orange trees thrived. Ilara filled the rooms with color and light, but more importantly, with laughter. Alexander's laughter, once a rusty, forgotten thing, became a common, rich sound that echoed in the halls. He still had his dark days, moments when the ghosts gathered close. But now, he did not face them alone. She would find him in his study, staring into the fire, and without a word, she would sit on the rug at his feet, leaning her head against his good knee. He would rest his hand in her hair, and the silence would be a shared burden, not a solitary torment. Their physical connection was a constant, slow-burning flame. He was an ardent, inventive lover, his initial insecurity replaced by a confident passion that left her breathless and sated. They made love in his bed, in hers, once, memorably, in the library amidst the scent of old paper and leather. He learned her body with a dedication that made her blush, and she learned his, worshipping every scar, every sensitive place that made him gasp her name. It was on a bright morning in early summer, as they breakfasted in the now sun-drenched morning room, Bumbles the spaniel looking on from his portrait with apparent approval, that a wave of dizziness washed over Ilara. The smell of kippers, which she usually tolerated, sent her stomach lurching violently. She clapped a hand over her mouth and fled the room. She returned, pale and shaken, to find Alexander already on his feet, his face etched with concern. "Ilara? What is it? Are you ill?" She looked at him, her mind racing, counting weeks. A missed cycle. The tenderness in her breasts shed attributed to his attentions. The sudden, peculiar aversions. "I'm not ill," she said slowly, a wondrous, terrifying hope beginning to blossom in her chest. "Alexander. I think. I might be with child." The color drained from his face. He swayed, gripping the back of his chair. "A child," he whispered, the word laden with a lifetime of hope and fear. His eyes dropped to her still flat stomach, then back to her face. "Are you certain?" "Not yet. But I feel different." He crossed to her in 2 strides, ignoring his cane, and dropped to his knees before her chair. He took her hands in his own trembling. A child, he repeated, his voice thick. He laid his head gently in her lap, his arms wrapping around her waist. She felt the dampness of his tears through her thin mourning dress. My love. My brave, beautiful love. The physician from the village confirmed it a week later. Ilara was, indeed, expecting. The news sent Alexander into a state of alternating exhilaration and abject terror. He became fiercely protective, fretting over her health, ordering the finest foods, banning her from riding, a decree she gently but firmly negotiated, and driving the staff to distraction with his solicitude. As her pregnancy progressed, it became apparent this was no ordinary condition. Her belly swelled with remarkable speed. By the 5th month, she was as large as a woman near her time. The physician, upon examination, listened with a furrowed brow, moving his ear trumpet over her distended abdomen again and again. Your Grace, he said, his voice hushed with awe and trepidation as Alexander stood rigidly by her side, holding her hand in a death grip. I must inform you. I believe I detect more than one heartbeat. Alexander went perfectly still. More than one. Twins, at the very least, Your Grace. Perhaps. More. Ilara's modern mind word. Triplets. The word from her original, desperate daydream whispered back to her. She met Alexander's stunned gaze and saw not fear, but a dawning, incredulous joy. More than one heir for Blackwood, he breathed, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. He leaned down, kissing her tenderly. You never do anything by halves, do you, my time-traveling wife? The final months were a trial of immense proportions. She was enormous, uncomfortable, and often short of breath. Alexander was her constant shadow, massaging her swollen feet, reading to her, holding her when the fears came in the night. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I can't do this? She whispered once in the dark. He turned her face towards him, his eyes earnest in the moonlight. You crossed centuries, Ilara. You stormed the fortress of a broken duke and taught him how to live again. You will be a magnificent mother. And I will be by your side, for every moment. The labor began on a stormy autumn night, the wind howling around the manor like a chorus of ancient spirits. It was long, and it was hard. Alexander refused to be banished to the corridor, as was the custom. He stayed by the head of the bed, his face ashen but resolute, gripping her hand, letting her crush his fingers, wiping her brow, whispering words of love and encouragement that were her anchor in the tempest of pain. After hours that felt like days, with the dawn just beginning to lighten the sky, their first child entered the world, a son, with a powerful cry and a shock of dark hair. Before the midwife could even clean him, a second cry echoed in the room. A daughter, smaller but just as fierce, with hair the color of her father's wheat gold. Ilara, exhausted but euphoric, thought it was over. But the midwife's experienced hands pressed on her belly, and her face changed. There's another, Your Grace. One more. Push, my lady. With Alexander's hands supporting her, with the last ounce of strength in her body, she pushed. And their third child, another son, slipped into the world, quiet for a moment before letting out her indignant wail. Triplets. 2 boys and a girl. The midwife and maids bustled, cleaning and swaddling. Alexander stood frozen, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he looked from his wife, radiant and exhausted on the pillows, to the 3 tiny, squalling bundles. Ilara weakly held out her arms. Bring them to me. Bring them to us. The midwife placed the children carefully beside her on the bed. Alexander sat on the edge, one hand touching his daughter's tiny, perfect cheek, the other resting on Ilara's shoulder, as if he needed to anchor himself to both. My love, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Look what we have made. She looked at their children, then up at him, at the man who had been a recluse, a ghost, now vibrantly alive, his eyes full of a love so vast it filled the room. The scar on his face was just a part of the landscape of the man she adored. The cane leaning against the bedpost was not a symbol of weakness, but of the strength it took to stand every day. We did it, she whispered, her own tears falling. We really did it. He leaned down, kissing her forehead, then each of their children in turn. Names, he said. We must give them names. Elara smiled, looking at their firstborn, the sturdy boy. William, she said. For your father. She looked at their daughter. Eleanor. For your sister. Finally, she touched the cheek of their youngest son. And Thomas. For the future. A strong, honest name. Alexander's throat worked. He could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. He gathered Eleanor, his daughter, into the crook of his arm, while Elara cradled William and Thomas. The storm outside had passed, and the first true rays of morning sun streamed through the window, painting the scene in gold. Later, when the babes had been taken to the nursery to be fed and Elara had been washed and settled into clean linens, Alexander lay beside her on the wide bed, holding her close. The house was quiet, buzzing with a joyful, hushed excitement. I once thought this house was cursed, he murmured into her hair. That happiness was a guest that could never linger here again. And now? She asked, her eyes drifting closed. He propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at her, his face softer than she had ever seen it. Now, I think it was merely waiting. Waiting for you to arrive from your future, to kick the doors open, and to fill it with this. He gestured around them, at the sunlit room, at the distant, contented gurgle from the nursery. With this impossible, glorious noise. You have not just given me a family, Elara. You have given me back my life. You have given me a future. She reached up, tracing the line of his scar. We have given each other a future, Alexander. Together. He kissed her, a promise sealed. And as they drifted into an exhausted, happy sleep, entwined in the bed where they had first become one, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood knew that their story, born of accidental time travel, forged in pain, and cemented in a passion that had healed them both, was only just beginning. The great oak on the lawn stood witness, its branches sheltering a legacy of love that would, at last, endure. The end. If you loved this story and want more, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a fellow romance lover, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale.